Welcome to A Lovely Wallpaper, a podcast exploring an underappreciated way of appreciating poetry by committing it to memory. To know a poem by heart means having a worry stone, a provocation, a comfort, a quick exit, always close at hand. Lose yourself in a poem, gain a world with its mastery.
The art of losing isn't hard to master. So many things seem filled with the intent to be lost, that a loss is no disaster.
Welcome to the first half of a special double episode in which I talk with Darryl Pinckney, critic, novelist, librettist, and person with a veritable library of poetry in his head. In New York, there are a number of small pedestrian alleyways and cul-de-sacs lined with short brick or wood townhouses. There's Sylvan Terrace in Washington Heights, Patchen Place in Greenwich Village, Washington Mews near NYU. They are delightfully incongruous, and when you're within these spaces, you tend to feel transported. If you are outside one of these enclaves looking in, there can be a sense of optical illusion, as though quaint row houses are collaged on top of high-rises, as though a cobblestone walkway is cutting a portal into the looming modern city. That is how Darryl Pinckney's author photo appears on the back of his book, High Cotton, as he stands at the mouth of Pomander Walk, which is named for a fictional street in a popular 1910 play and which cuts through a block in the West 90s. In the photo, the tiny Tudor houses are dwarfed by the apartments surrounding it, and Darryl is smiling, as though he has built something intimate, wedged into something huge and teeming. This is also what his books promise, writing as he does about a life lived among networks of fascinating and influential people. Darryl does not try to press on us anyone's cultural importance, only their personal importance to him. His books are studies of the way conversations and contingencies, encounters with art, and obsessions with literature form his narrators. His work is rich with detail of a life that straddled old guard and avant-garde, uptown and downtown. He was equally at home roaming between East Village lofts and punk clubs and talking poetry on the Upper West Side with the founders of the New York Review of Books. Both scenes are from an old New York I've long idolized. Actually, I arrived at this interview wearing my Bush Tetras reunion t-shirt, since Darryl is friends with Cynthia Slay, the band's singer, and eager to show off my little copy-checking credit in the acknowledgments of Robert Lowell's collected letters, since Darryl was close with Lowell's family. In spite of all this cachet, and unlike me in this moment, I suppose, Darryl is never name-droppy or gossipy. In fact, there's this wonderful reflection in his novel Black Deutschland, where he writes, "I'd lived my life camping out in other people's stories, waiting for my own to begin, but unable to get out of the great head and into my actual." This line of Darryl's, even in its self-deprecation, just goes to remind what a marvelous campsite the great head makes, and just how much his voice lends to it. Anyhow, this is only the first of 2 episodes, and in this one we will focus on his book Come Back in September, A Literary Education on West 67th Street, which he wrote about his mentor, writer Elizabeth Hardwick, as well as his Bildungsroman High Cotton. For the poem, Darryl will be presenting Crossing the Water by Sylvia Plath, a work which has followed him through many stages of his life. This is a sprawling interview just like the scope of Darryl's books, so we will jump right into his time at Columbia.
To talk about Plath brings back the whole time when poetry was such a discovery, and what it had meant at home or in junior high school and high school suddenly changed in college, mostly through my peers and especially through my teachers. I mean, I arrived sort of full of Plath, and to the horror of Kenneth Koch and David Shapiro, who actually really opened up a whole new world of poetry for me, not just through the New York School, but also through their influences. They were very French rather than English or Elizabethan, though Koch's class was pretty fierce about studying the Elizabethan poets, whom he liked a lot, especially Wyatt.
Didn't you mention
and the sonnets.
come back in September that he had you do kind of an interesting exercise, right? Weren't you
Yeah,
supposed to imitate?
we had to imitate this every poet that he assigned. And he liked my Wyatt. I wish I could find it, but he liked that. I was very proud of that. My Spencerian stanzas were a bit dodgy, but by the time you do that, you really kind of understand how this particular form is put together, what it means. And David did the same for various French forms. I can't remember them now. But, I arrived never having heard of Rimbaud before, never having read Apollinaire. And so, every week there was an addition to one's life, not just a further education, because these poems really stayed with one and meant a lot. And what got me sort of away from Sylvia Plath was Frank O'Hara, this kind of open, very personal, and obviously gay poetry. And I still have that huge Donald Allen anthology that,
I think in your book you call it a huggable volume.
it is. It really is. You kind of take it down from the shelf and walk with it.
That's funny. So you were just showing me some of not your notes in Crossing the Water in your old Sylvia Plath volumes, but poetry that you wrote in response. Is that something that you picked up from the class to work in the style of certain poets, or do those notes predate your classes with David Shapiro and Kenneth Koch?
They predate, but they are also, I think, are about the poetry I was writing at the time, unfortunately. So I won't read you a single line of them.
Too bad. I was about to ask whether anything jumped out to you.
Yeah, it all jumps out to me as like an ambush of stupidity. But
So hard on yourself, but you had Elizabeth Hardwick there to be hard on you.
yes, but not just on me. She was hard on everyone. But, it's why people wanted to take her class, because she didn't sort of play around with you. She took you very seriously, and she was very forthright and made you kind of understand how serious this was, and not just about expression, but about knowing how to do it. That it wasn't just, even a natural wasn't a natural. That was someone who had a certain gift for a certain thing and had the chance or the intelligence to develop it and cultivate it. But yes, her classes were very exciting, also because of the reading she brought in, since she liked the prose that poets liked. And so the line between poetry and prose, dissolved a little bit. That language was always at stake. And that was a very valuable and unforgettable lesson.
Right, right. She left an amazing impression on you. And your title,
Yes.
in September, is so interesting because it sounds like a mentor presenting a mentee with an opportunity sort of thing. But you use it a little bit differently when that phrase comes up in the book. And I love the ambiguity that kind of evokes this reciprocity. Can you tell me a little bit more about how you landed on that phrase?
Well, it sort of meant try again. It certainly meant semester to semester. And then after I knew her better and her own sort of life, it meant her coming back from her summer in Maine. She always came back in September. And after Lowell's death in one September, she came back with Sleepless Nights in the next September. So I would say it has a few meanings that fit the schedule of knowing her, so to speak, from campus to 67th Street.
Right.
If that makes any sense.
Yeah, absolutely. Even in growing, this academic rhythm stays a little bit.
Yeah. September was always great. We got away from home, fresh chances, seeing old friends, new classes. It breaks my heart to see Columbia locked up the way it is now. Because when I came back to New York, I would always go across College Walk and look at the new students and the old places, and you can't do that anymore. And also, Columbia was for me such an opening up of the head that it sort of locked up to me is about how much has been closed down. It's really enraging and grief making at the same time, what has happened there. And at many other universities, and perhaps through the humanities in general.
Yeah. There's so much news coming out about humanities programs being lost and closed down. And yeah, it's very sad. I mean, it's one reason why it's so beautiful to read a recollection like this. And I think you portray so well this opening of the head experience you talk about. It in one of the first few pages, you have Hardwick jumping up in kind of exasperation with some undergrads saying poetry is everywhere. And it's so funny because then for the next 400 pages, poetry is everywhere. Up in the middle of the night to remember whether Keats said this line and Byron said this line, or Byron said this line and Keats said this line. It really is. It's a portrait of a life where, literature is absolutely pervasive.
She always thought that was a very lucky life, to live with books, among books, for books. And people who have, a life with books produces a different kind of citizen from what's sort of wanted at the moment, I would say.
You invoke Frances Yates a little bit, kind of at the beginning of Come Back in September. And I love the way you do it because you remember that this book about the art of memory, the medieval and ancient art of memory exists. And you remember not asking Barbara Epstein about it and not asking Elizabeth Hardwick about it. And then you ask your partner, James Fenton, about it. Because you can go find the book in the house.
Yes.
Then you don't. And it's so funny to see this recollection of a book that could be useful to you in this moment where you're trying to travel back in memory and reconstruct this world that has gone by, or this phase of life that has gone by. I guess I want to put that out there, partially because I love that book and, it's so tied into what I'm thinking about all the time.
Yeah.
But also I see it as kind of an ars poetica for what you're doing here as you create this space. What I need to know is, how is the physical linking up with the intellectual as you're remembering? Are you remembering the living room and the coffee table and then remembering what books people are talking about in each scene? Or are you remembering what everybody's talking about and then building the space from there?
I think that in Come Back in September, my memory is so connected to people, and these people I saw in the same places all the time. So I spoke to Lizzie in her living room on that red sofa, surrounded by her books every Sunday for years. And so the two are very sort of connected. Finding books in her library in that room on those ladders and listening to her is very connected. Talking to then Luke, now Lucy Sant, in the West End Cafe is very connected. And the editions we had sort of in front of us, it's all together. And the same goes with talking to James. But when I was writing the book, I was in New York, and the New York of my youth was, of course, gone, and Lizzie was gone, and the West End Cafe was gone. And it wasn't where I first unpacked my books and James's books together in Oxford. So you did have to kind of find them again. And often that meant sort of finding or unpacking your relationship to them or to the person that they evoked in your memory. And I remember trying to read again Benjamin's, I don't know how to say his name anymore. Walter Benjamin sounds a bit silly, but that's what we said. That essay, Unpacking Your Library. And it was very unhelpful to what I was sort of feeling and thinking. So I did have to go and find the Yeats again. But as it turned out, what it said about the art of memory or how you remember it was almost enough to do it just that, the way he says, he gives the argument that's in the book. And that seemed better than me holding forth. He's funnier than I am, James.
Right.
Does
Well,
that give enough of an answer?
yeah, absolutely. I mean, it
Yeah.
just, the sense of space in the book is just incredible. It's so specific the way, you'll remember what book you and Hardwick were talking about as she's taking something out of the oven, it does feel very much as though you're going back through kind of not methodically, because that makes it sound joyless, but like you are retraveling and revisiting in this very sensory
It,
way, but that folds the discussions in, folds the books in.
yes. I suppose love makes these places sacred spaces, but also there's a great attachment she felt to the book as an object that she was able to pass on to a lot of her students.
Your journals from this period burned. How many years of journals was that? I mean, can you tell me a little bit more about that?
Well, Come Back in September covers really just 1973 to about 1981. And then there's an epilogue at the end in the form of journals and letters. That's just 1989. Maybe if I had it to do over, I would have left that out, the journals at the end. They're mostly about Susan. And anyway,
I liked the journals at the end, but the reason that I liked them so much is because it really threw into relief the full kind of physical re-experiencing in the rest of the book. When
right.
the journals arrive, it's like there's quite a bit more detail and immediacy, but also
Yeah.
it's not physically inhabited in the same way as
Yes. They're just documents and sort of epilogue of documents. I'm not trying to say this is Berlin or anything like that. I'm just someone who's away from the scene that the book is about. I always kept a journal or tried to. I forget how old I was when I first read Diary of Anne Frank, and I tried to keep a diary, but I wasn't locked up in an attic, so that didn't last very long. And then in German class in high school, I had a terrific crush on a guy who sat in front of me in the class and began to keep a journal again because it's not something I could talk about with anybody. And developed the habit of keeping a journal. And often I would sort of try to imitate whatever I was reading. So I remember one journal that was split up, like the Golden Notebook, things like that. And then I would always, wasn't just Hardwick's class, write down everything a professor said and try to remember it for a journal. And the college journals were the ones that burned. And then Lizzie was glad were gone. And she said everything I ever said, and she's quite right, but only the stuff she said in class because I didn't know her so well by then. And I'm sorry about that. But I've kept a journal ever since. So it runs for about, I don't know, I can't do the math, but it's probably 50 years or so. It's a sort of comfort to me still. And I can say things or feel things and then take them back. Certainly when Virginia Woolf's diaries came out year after year after year, it reinforced the habit. These are sort of great works in my mind. And so, and I always liked the Goncourts and Pepys. And I first read Pepys in a much abridged and censored version. But it was a period of history of English history that I really liked. So all these things mixed to make the journal matter to me. And then writing Come Back in September was the first time I looked back at certain passages. And that wasn't easy, what a turkey. But there were then people in their sort of brilliance on the page that I inadvertently or luckily remembered or tried to capture at the time. I mean, I had to make myself, I don't want to say naive, but to try and reproduce the feeling of learning something from these people, as well as knowing the good fortune I had in meeting them. And that was always very real. I think for my generation, we knew where we were and who we were talking to and what an experience it was. And I couldn't put in everything. I'd written a story that became a chapter of a novel about having been briefly Juna Barnes's maid. And
I Cotton.
yes, and she was, amazing person to listen to, And then Howard Brookner come back in September. You could listen to Burroughs a lot, but he was never someone who I was really drawn to in the same way. I found him a bit sort of rough going, some of his ideas and what he was about. His conversation was pretty wild. But Lizzie's conversation was, to me, always interesting. Always. Because she was thinking about things all the time. Not just books, but other things. But this was about books. And she was, a good talker, as they say.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean,
and she could step aside and talk about the book. It wasn't always her ego on display. When she spoke about literature, she wasn't speaking as, someone who thought herself in any way the peer of what she was talking about. She had a kind of real humility about literature that made the things she said all the more beautiful and thoughtful, in her approach. What was someone's intention? What did they achieve? What was this person's life like? She was especially sympathetic to what were the obstacles, socially and psychologically, because she lived in a world where a lot of people struggled to write for various reasons.
Right. It certainly comes through in the conversations you recount, but also in Seduction and Betrayal. I just reread her essay on Plath in preparation for talking to you, and it was so interesting to hear her talk about this sort of alienation, a little bit different from what you naturally think of in Plath.
Yes.
So central to her, being
yes.
disappointed forever by having foreign parents and never finding herself at home in Massachusetts or something like that. It was an angle that you don't
yes.
think about her being alienated from herself in plenty of ways, but not. So yeah, to speak to what
not unrooted from birth.
Right.
Yeah.
You arrived on the scene. You became friends with Elizabeth Hardwick really not too long after The Dolphin came out.
Yes.
And I mean, it's such a devastating story, the idea, that she had so much of her personal business shared in this way that betrays privacy. Though writers, there's a long history of writers betraying the privacy of their loved ones. But what's so interesting here is that since she herself was a writer and editor, it's kind of a unique vulnerability because the text itself would have this value to her, I'm assuming. Did you ever get the sense, writer to writer, that there were any specific lines or ideas that she felt not just betrayed her privacy, but also stole something from her from a future project? Or
not from a future project. I think she minded the manipulation of voice, and that sort of stole her identity as a writer and made her a public witness to something that to her was a very private matter. I mean, she lived with this confessional poet. She, in fact, helped to make him. Life Studies was written sort of with her as a reader, sitting there saying, well, you meant the opposite, but it was just about his mental states and his family. This was something quite different. I think I didn't like Notebook in those editions and didn't talk to her much about them. And the year that 3 books came out that were related to Notebook for Lizzie and Harriet History, and I forget the last one. But The Dolphin, I think she minded mostly that these letters were offered as evidence but changed so that they said what he wanted them to say or what he thought that she was saying. And then she never had a chance to see if she'd said it or not. Saskia Hamilton, many years later, edited the original manuscript, and some people said it was better than the version that had first been published. That may have been true. I found it.
Did any shifting Hardwick's words back to reflect the letters? Did she change that at all, or she looked just at the Frank Bedard?
She looked at the first version of the manuscript.
Okay.
And then there was, I think, a lengthy afterward. The Dolphin letters themselves, they found after Caroline's death. Lizzie thought they'd been destroyed, but they found them after Caroline's death. And Saskia, my memory serves me right, does go through and point out various changes or contradictions. And it's more a question of emphasis, what he thought she was saying, or what the shape of the book needed for him to say. For me, in the beginning, she's understanding in a way that says she thinks he's going mad again. But once Caroline is pregnant and she hasn't been told until much later, she's furious. I'm very wounded and feels she's been made a fool of. That her own kind of sympathy for him as a person was taken advantage of. And that, I think, is the sadness of the letters as letters. Whether the original version or the published version, which is better, is hard for me to say. It's not a book I can judge fairly. I just, for so long, lived with her anguish over it. But it was a real rough business for her. The reviews were unkind about her, and especially from a few feminists in New York who were saying things sounded like she got what she deserved and things like that. None of this, given what people say in print nowadays, gets how shocking all that was back then, to be called these names when what you've done is stick by a guy who was pretty difficult to live with because he had severe mental problems. But she believed in his genius. She really did. And she was faulted by feminists for that, for having a male-dominated idea of genius. But she thought Virginia Woolf was clearly a genius, according to her definition, which was these people are impossible to imitate, but everything's somehow different after they've done it. And that's true of Woolf, I would say, as someone who spent a large time trying to imitate her. Speaking of memory, I used to try and commit the waves to memory.
I saw that. That's incredible.
So imagining, you could do a lot when you were bombed in those days. Or no challenge seemed outrageous.
You even have the, advantage of a regular metrical scheme or rhyme long.
Well, her prose did have a certain rhythm.
Right.
And the waves lent itself to knowing it. But yeah, dear Lizzie,
It's a wonderful tribute.
well, you're very kind. It was meant as that. It really was. And as well as, to an era that is very gone in New York and in literary culture as well.
Right.
But as I said, I think we knew where we were and what was happening.
It's
Even the people you didn't like.
to understand that you're in a moment as you're living it. It's funny, I guess about a year ago, I interviewed Lucy,
Um,
and we talked for a moment about this phrase or this sentence somewhere, and I heard her call my name that was like, I needed the world historical on the daily. And it tracks with the way she experienced and recorded things. And I think with you too, I think you might need a little bit of the world historical on the daily as well.
yes. Yeah. The world is too much with us. Yeah.
So you mentioned working with Saskia Hamilton. She was my professor in
Really?
she was a professor and wonderful poet who I admired. It was very sad to lose her, but I
The most gentle soul.
truly it's funny to see, to read about some of the tough love that Elizabeth Hardwick gave to you. And when I think about being in Saskia's poetry class, incredibly, smart, kind person, but, absolutely very, very gentle on everyone's work in a way that was, also had its own value. But it's funny when I read about Elizabeth Hardwick telling you your poetry's no good, you need to give up with it. I could have died. I think when Saskia told me to read more Emily Dickinson rather than Marianne Moore, I think that offended me. Because it was all about the modernism for me. Why would I want to go back to the 19th century? And in
Maybe
retrospect,
she said that's where modernism began.
right. In retrospect, it was the most wonderful advice. I didn't really get it at the time. I identify more with Emily Dickinson than maybe anybody else now in poetics. So she was
I
very,
think she was probably talking about philosophy.
yeah.
To think of Dickinson as a philosophy kind of poet or a philosophical poet, which is what she would have in common with Marianne Moore. Maybe. I mean, there was one area I couldn't talk to Saskia about, and that was Christopher Ricks.
I don't know Christopher Ricks.
Oh, well, he's a sort of looming critical figure in her life and not in mine.
Okay,
And he
interesting.
wrote a huge long book about Dylan, and that's one thing Lucy and I just don't talk about. I've never been a Bob Dylan anything.
Oh, me neither.
It's white guys. It's just white guys.
My husband makes fun of me for it. And I could never decide when I was in high school. I loved all that DC punk music, and the Minutemen had a song called Bob Dylan Writes Propaganda Songs. And I just immediately crossed Dylan off of consideration. But yeah, it's funny. Yes, Saskia Hamilton, I was very deep in the college radio, and she told me to read Greil Marcus. He covered different periods from what I was
Yeah.
interested in.
Yeah.
But anyways, Saskia was really wonderful. And I have a story to tell you. I worked on the collected letters with her, just checking transcriptions. And I think I was reading all letters between Robert Lowell and Elizabeth Bishop.
Yeah.
And, it was fascinating to see these letters and look at how they inhabited the page, see the handwriting. I mean,
Yeah.
photocopies, but nonetheless, it was absorbing. And, I think after a while, I'd get absorbed enough in the letters, I'd wonder if I was actually picking up on mistranscriptions or not. So, it would go on and on. But then finally, after, days and days of reading, there was a moment where Lowell was talking about his literal travels. And it was transcribed as literal, like by the letter. And it was actually littoral, like having to do with
Islands.
having to do with the seashore. And I was so thrilled. It was the triumph of the century for me. And that I had finally found an error that wasn't just a comma.
Well, it makes a big difference.
Wonderful of her to bring in undergrads to help with this because
Yeah. she's very patient with him in the letters, I find. Not always at his best, but just as a sort of talking about poetry, they're really interesting and their judgments. Um, but I think he didn't know what to do with a competitor who wasn't competing with him.
Mm.
She wasn't a guy. She didn't need that, So I think she had a sense of self-worth that when she needed it, and it may have left her at other times, but she held her own with him.
Right.
Do people still read Lowell? I hope so.
I'm not a good barometer for what people are doing. I haven't worked in higher ed ever
Yeah, me neither.
for a long time, and nobody was reading Lowell in high school. So
No, I don't think they ever did.
all of my reading is self-directed. We could
Good
it's
for us.
but
Good for us.
it's the life. I love it. So
Well, my father knew a lot of Kipling and a lot of Langston Hughes by heart.
yeah.
And Langston Hughes was, a poet who was always in the house. But maybe because it was my father's poet, I never took to him personally. And Lizzie, I remember thinking Langston Hughes was too simple, which I didn't exactly like. But even someone like Sterling Brown, who was kind of master of form, it was folk poetry. And I wasn't sort of interested in the South or the folk. For me, it was all urban yesterday, which is probably why I took to Frank O'Hara so quickly, because you could go to these streets and experience these things. And the Black poet I liked was Robert Hayden, just because of the formal beauty of his work and the tone about history. Carol Phillips published not so long ago a book that showed really how much he liked Wallace Stevens. And I found it interesting for that. But even the Black poets I know who are good, like Terrence Hayes and Major Jackson, and a lot of those people from the Cave Canem group, when I read them, I'm keeping up as an older Black person on what's happening. But it's not, it's not what I'm going to sit with. And that bothers me, and I can't explain it. And I sort of feel unable to get past the poets that I liked 50 years ago or something. I can't put it into words. I can't,
it's something about these poems and these poets having formed some of your literary content.
That also, but the change in poetry too. A lot of contemporary poetry is fine. I can't explain it. I'm going to not do it well.
I mean, the other thing you say about not being able to get past the poets that you loved in your youth. I mean, poetry is so much not designed to be read in this linear way,
Right.
Poetry is designed to stick you. Like that you want to, if poetry is really good, you want to keep returning to the same things.
Yes.
It's like a song, it's like music, it's
Yeah.
so different from reading novels or prose where
Yeah.
are moving from work to work and
Yeah.
don't necessarily have the same need to return to the same thing.
Well, I can read Louise Gluck, and then sort of if I don't read it again, that's fine. And most people feel very passionate about her, but can't say that I ever have, though I've recognized, what she can do. I'm trying to think. I don't read as much poetry as I used to. That may be the biggest thing. It's not the first thing I go to. And the poetry that you see in magazines is often just filler. So it gives you a name to check out later. But then I don't go check it out. I don't hunt down poetry the way I used to. It's not a big part of my day, though some of my most intense literary memories are about poetry and poets. So it's a loss and a form of laziness, maybe. I can't explain it. I sort of miss feeling that way, you know.
Right.
We would rather sort of to miss a John Ashbery reading was a catastrophe. But now I can't read him anymore. That's one guy I can't go back to. He wrote so much, and someone else's dreams are only of interest, but for so long. And I can't think of a single Ashbery line I can quote. But at the time, he was the most influential guy on what everyone else was writing. And he couldn't have been a nicer presence and all of those things. And the poetry I remember had a great deal of beauty.
I mean, it
I
is
don't know why.
by design in that it's written without footholds and without clear and easy meaning.
It's endlessly itself.
Sound. It's meant to sound like the texture of something.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, but that's interesting. I mean, so maybe now's a good time to start talking a little bit more about Sylvia Plath. I mean, you're going to present Crossing the Water today. Recommendation for memory. So I want to ask you a little bit more about your relationship to her work. One thing that came up in Comeback in September is that you held suicide anniversary parties. It's funny. I remember maybe when I was a teenager, there was some sort of fashion magazine spread where they did, posed Sylvia Plath in an outfit and opposed Virginia Woolf in an outfit. And it was very crass and there was a lot of moral panic. But one of the interesting things with reading Hardwick on Plath is that death to her was like excited and breathless. That's the way she looked at it. It was a perspective she brought to it, like a thrill and a relish that's kind of celebratory. So in that light, it seems kind of like it does make sense. Anyways, I'm rambling, but tell me about these parties and what you brought to the table there, how that worked out.
Well, they didn't really work out. I mean, it just kind of, the ghoulish announcement was the thing. And then you're in the room with the same people you're always in the room with. And they weren't Plath readers by any means. And there was never enough to drink. So it always adjourned to the West End or someplace else. So as parties, they were failures. It was just the rumor of them or the announcement of them, the intention. I think Howard and I once did sort of have a sort of blowout, but, there was no reading of Plath or mention of Plath. The girls at Barnard read Plath. The boys at Columbia did not. So it sort of set me apart for one thing. And Plath was someone I brought from Indiana. I had a friend at Indiana University, a theater director named Gail Shetsky, who gave me Ario. And that's the first I sort of knew. And I was immediately sort of taken. But the myth of Plath kind of came with Ariel as well. I didn't know she was a suicide when I first read it. They were just these, very persistent poems. And they were different from what I had been reading, which was contemporary Black poetry like Mari Evans or Etheridge Knight, Leroy Jones, the Black poetry that was in the shelf at home, Langston Hughes and Sterling Brown and all of that. And then the poetry in school that was very much still Shelley and not Byron, Keats. Well, Byron was too difficult for us.
Nine in High Cotton, where you talk about dressing yourself in Byronic drag. Tell me a little bit about the garments that made up your Byronic drag.
Frilly shirts, buckle shoes, black pants, and no, I'm not going to mow the lawn. It was really, I mean, Anglophilia was a form of kind of gay drag for me, looking back, all of that stuff. And Plath was a part of that. And I think that it had a secret sadism that I was drawn to in ways I didn't understand. Whereas by the time I got around to Woolf, I read Quentin Bell's biography first. And so the cult of Woolf for me was this kind of delicate, mental, suicidal, endangered gift. And Plath never came across as weak. She was really angry. So she sort of fit with the militant poetry I had been reading. It just didn't have a racial context or content. And you can skip over nigger-eyed berries cast dark. Oh, I can't remember the line now. But it just sort of rolled over me. I didn't think about what the image meant or what her attitude was or what a nigger eye looked like. It was the word. And it was much more around in contemporary Black poetry than would be allowed today. When Nikki Giovanni, who's known for her love poems, wrote very kind of brutal works of militant challenge, nigger, can you kill a Jew? You couldn't write that today. You really couldn't. Could you run, Protestant down with your 68 Eldorado? It's very taunting. People were being taunted. The reader was being taunted. And that fit with sort of what Plath seemed to be doing. And then I remember I went to the Lilly Library and listened to recordings of her, and she sounded nothing like what I thought she would sound like at all. And then Crossing the Water came out, and the whole thing changed. It was much calmer voice. This was a poetry I was used to. Frost was in the home and in the school as well. And she seemed more related to not this landscape, but this kind of formal poetry. And I think I was liked Crossing the Water. It's still the poem in the book I like the best. And it has this musical quality and this very sayable quality from the very first lines, I still don't know what the lines really mean, but there's something very sayable about it all. Black lake, black boat, two black cut paper people,
Right. I love that. That's so interesting. You're talking about this militancy kind of matching up with some of the Black poetry you had been reading. I'd never thought of it that way, but that's so cool. At the very beginning of Come Back in September, you introduce yourself to Elizabeth Hardwick by reciting this very poem to her.
Yes.
And it is maybe the only time this particular poem ever got a laugh.
Yes.
You open with, she laughed because you're very conscious of the kind of figure that you're cutting. You're a guy from across the street, you're a Black man coming across the street to Barnard, asking to enter this poetry class. And what you recite this poem, I mean, the way you type it in the book is you smush all the words together. Black lake, black oak, black cut of paper. I mean, it's almost like you're hemorrhaging the word black, right? It's almost like a slip or something like that. But then the poem, it's about shadows. It's not about race. It's about astounded souls facing potential void and, being called towards death by nature. There's so many interpretations to the poem, but it's really cool to see. I love how you entered the book through this poem and through poetry as kind of this ground to communicate on.
Well, it was a specific question. She asked, what was I reading or what did I like? I can't remember. And I think I wrote it without punctuation to indicate no stopping, no breath, that it just came out as this rapid sort of delight in words and wasn't trying to think about the meaning. The last line, this is the silence of astounded souls. I still don't know quite what that means or what that would sound like, but I do know what joy it is to say black lake, black boat, two black cut paper people. Where did the black trees go that drink here? Their shadows must cover Canada. It's just, there's a certain freedom in saying it and introducing it this way. As somber as it is, there's a sort of gracefulness in the lines, and you can sort of row yourself along on all these. It's like being on the water, and then the next stanza, is like passing this landscape in a small boat. And so, you're thinking more of Monet than of anything, and of sort of kind of beauty. I think I like the poem because of its beauty more than its meaning, but just the delight of words and the surprise of words. Their shadows must cover Canada. I mean, doesn't mean this is a big funk. It means imagine a shadow that big, you know. So um, it has a door for the child as well as for the adult in what it could mean or the pleasure of it.
It's such a beautiful way of putting it. A door for the child and a door for the adult.
Yeah, you know. And I think, Plath being so around at the time, I think she laughed because it was this poem, not Stasis in Darkness, then the substanceless blue, pour of Taurus distance. You know what I mean? Which you can only say as one of Macbeth's witches.
Did you have to apply? I mean, it seems like you have an incredible memory. Or did you sit down with these books and learn line by line? Or did you like apply yourself to learn these
No, I
poems?
think it came from reading them again and again, a bit like an actor. I once asked a famous actor, how she learned a line, and she kind of looked at me and said, I just keep reading it. So there was that. And then I think my memory was better then than now. In high school, we had to learn a lot of Shakespeare by heart for classes and presentations. And so I used to know a lot of Julius Caesar and can't recall a word of it now. I have James, his head is full of all kinds of poetry, very classical lines but also a lot of nonsense poetry he knows and takes a delight in. And another friend, Margot Jefferson, I'm astonished by how much poetry she knows, but these are also two people who remember song lyrics. And so I think there's a great connection between song and spoken and memory for them. And for me, it was sort of performance. And, oration used to be a very big part of Black education, Black culture, where people could stand and sort of deliver these long performances of poems and things like that. My mother knew the Song of Hiawatha, and my father knew Ababoom, Adam May's Tribe Increase, and you would get these sort of at surprising moments at the dinner table how much they knew. They could go through the whole thing, but this had been a part of this life where I think it came from a world of declamation and speeches anyway, as well as not everyone had a textbook, but it was just something they could all do.
I love this moment in High Cotton. It comes up the grandfather in this novel.
Gosh, you did read a lot for this.
I mean, I like to be prepared.
Well,
Excuse me
I just
for my self-directed reading, Darryl. Well, I wanna know everything. But the grandfather in this novel gets himself out of a jam, like a horrible jam in the South, having hit some white hunter's dog with his
yes.
and he's reciting Longfellow. Reciting Longfellow, and they're like, "Oh, well, he's the preacher." Oh, this is late.
Yeah, exactly.
Never mind.
I forgot that.
There's this line that I love where I'm trying to find it. Grandfather needed his history with him at all times, like an inhaler.
Yeah. Yeah.
I love that. I love that because, I mean, to your point about declamation and oration being so important, especially when people didn't have their own textbooks in the past, being able to carry your learning with you
Yes.
for the easy research we can do right now, being able to able to have easy access to books, to carry his learning with him like an inhaler. I love the line too, because it's also just, it reminds me of the line from Susie Boyd that I've named this podcast after. She's describing assigning students, or the narrator in her novel, Loved and Missed, is describing assigning students to memorize poems so that they can have a lovely wallpaper while in times of anxiety or waiting or boredom or, whatever. I'm paraphrasing terribly, but a lovely inhaler.
Yeah. Well,
Much more
you
urgent.
know,
It's a little bit less frilly, but more urgent.
yes,
Have
I
that
think
here as an inhaler to revive yourself, or you
to
know.
revive yourself, but also to, I think for him it was a risk because white people resented educated blacks more than anybody. So to sort of make this display was a real risk rather than, bowing and scraping. But, it was sort of who he was, and he's reminded of it by being able to summon this knowledge or this experience, and he was someone who couldn't have a direct conversation with him. He would only talk by quotation. So it was slightly maddening, but it was also veiling for him, And it wasn't always biblical, since his original ambition was never to be a preacher. It's what he ended up able to do. So he had a lot of poetry in him too. And I don't think my father got that from him because they weren't close. He was a rather distant figure. I think it was just part of being reading back then was to remember because you had this chance to read. And so you remembered, and I think they read it more than once, whatever they were reading. And, my father he didn't care that Kipling was the poet of imperialism as opposed to imperialism as he himself was. It was the pleasure of the words. Because I remember when I was little, he once did Gunga Din, that one for, if you play with my father, eventually Kipling would come out, not Cowboys and Indians Kipling. Yeah. I didn't think of that till now. Yeah. Are you a man? Yeah. Yeah. But so I think that one of the first things that attracted me to Plath was how speakerly it was. And this remains a quality that I like in prose as well. Not rhetorical, but human, sort of.
Well, before I ask you to go ahead and read Crossing the Water, I guess one more little thought experiment in Hardwick's essay, Sylvia Plath. He says that it is interesting to make to read Sylvia Plath as if she were still
It wasn't
alive. So I guess I want to kind of put that out there as a provocation for the listener and for us to think about it that way as we learn the poem. Does that make any sense?
Yes, that was always a very strange challenge on her part. It depended slightly on knowing Herbert's poetry and what kind of religious poetry she's talking about. This kind of appeal to darkness. And Lowell was never nice to her about that, at least within my hearing. He didn't like that.
Nice to Hardwick?
Hardwick, yeah.
He didn't.
I remember once he said, "You ruined Sylvia Plath for everyone." And I wasn't sure what that meant. That she had to be a suicide,
I mean, it's so central to her story that I think it's fascinating to take that away.
Yes. And then what are the poems?
I don't have a good understanding of Herbert's poetry, like you mentioned, but I mean, her mentioning that, it did open up in my mind she doesn't say it this way, but there is something incredibly stoic about the poetry in the sense that there's a comfort in death being a door that's always open. And that is kind of central to her philosophy.
I think that the many meanings that have accrued to the life present the poems in Ariel as much more revenge poems than they were probably meant to be. And so what Lizzie was alive to was the suffering in them and the sort of asking for a way out or seeing a way out and an end to suffering. But she doesn't want to say this is a wife. She wants to give her much more of a philosophical intent. But I think that early readers of Plath read them as a kind of suffering, either from mental illness or some form of injustice. and sort of fighting back. But not every poem is like that. Love sets you going like a fat gold watch. There's motherhood in there too. But I like Crossing the Water for its abstraction in that regard. And it's rather free of her biography and has its own life.
Yeah, I agree. I think it really is a wonderful poem to know by heart.
Crossing the Water. Black lake, black boat, two black cut paper people. Where did the black trees go that drink here? Their shadows must cover Canada. A little light is filtering from the water flowers. Their leaves do not wish us to hurry. They are round and flat and full of dark advice. Cold worlds shake from the oar. The spirit of blackness is in us. It is in the fishes. A snag is lifting a valedictory pale hand. Stars open among the lilies. Are you not blinded by such expressionless sirens? This is the silence of astounded souls.
Thank you, Darryl, for a beautiful reading. Now on to this poem of Sylvia Plath's. Crossing the Water is the final poem which closes out Plath's collection. But in the poem that opens it, Wuthering Heights, Plath also scans a dark landscape and makes something bucolic chilling. Observing sheep, she writes, "The black spots of their pupils take me in. It is like being mailed into space." This poem, in all its shadows and reflections, bring us again to that dark slot. It mails us into space. Let's begin with the first stanza, just 3 lines.
Black lake, black boat, two black cut paper people. Where did the black trees go that drink here? Their shadows must cover Canada. Black lake, black boat, two black cut paper people. Where did the black trees go that drink here? Their shadows must cover Canada.
The first line makes for such a tongue twister, though visually it cuts sharp silhouettes. As the stanza continues, the language simplifies, the lines shorten, but the images blur into hypothetical shadows, too large to really imagine.
A little light is filtering from the water flowers. Their leaves do not wish us to hurry. They are round and flat and full of dark advice. A little light is filtering from the water flowers. Their leaves do not wish us to hurry. They are round and flat and full of dark advice.
Each object in this poem is animated, but it is animated with an unfamiliar, cold blood.
Cold worlds shake from the oar. The spirit of blackness is in us. It is in the fishes. A snag is lifting a valedictory pale hand. Cold worlds shake from the oar. The spirit of blackness is in us. It is in the fishes. A snag is lifting a valedictory pale hand.
In talking about this poem, Darryl commented that valedictory is a very Plathian word. She's always saying goodbye, he told me, and it is very true. In this final stanza, I love how sky and earth mingle in the water as the stars, reflected, are meshed in with a tangle of lilies. I love that there is an impossible question and that it is answered definitively by silence.
Stars open among the lilies. Are you not blinded by such expressionless sirens? This is the silence of astounded souls. Stars open among the lilies. Are you not blinded by such expressionless sirens? This is the silence of astounded souls.
Let's hear the poem one more time.
Black lake, black boat, two black-cut paper people. Where did the black trees go that drink here? Their shadows must cover Canada. A little light is filtering from the water flowers. Their leaves do not wish us to hurry. They are round and flat and full of dark advice. Cold worlds shake from the oar. The spirit of blackness is in us. It is in the fishes. A snag is lifting a valedictory pale hand. Stars open among the lilies. Are you not blinded by such expressionless sirens? This is the silence of astounded souls.
And that was our poem. I hope it unfolded for you in a way which made you glad to make it your own. And I hope you can hold on to it. Review it on paper or let it live more like a song in your memory. Thank you to Susie Boyd for lending me this podcast's title, to G.W. Sock and the X for use of their song, The Art of Losing, which borrows the words of Elizabeth Bishop. And thank you to my sound engineer, Alex.
Disaster. Except the fluster of lost door keys, the hour badly spent.